Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is David Novak. I'm going to read a famous excerpt from a story of Sherlock Holmes written by Arthur Conan Doyle, or Sir Arthur. I don't know which story this is, but the passage is relatively famous, so you can Google it if you need to know. In the voice of Dr. Watson. His ignorance was as remarkable as his knowledge. Of contemporary literature, philosophy, and politics, he appeared to know next to nothing. Upon my quoting Thomas Carlyle, he inquired in the naivest way who he might be and what he had done. My surprise reached a climax, however, when I found incidentally that he was ignorant of the Copernican theory and of the composition of the solar system. That any civilized human being in this 19th century should not be aware that the Earth traveled round the sun appeared to be, to me, such an extraordinary fact that I could hardly realize it. "You appear to be astonished," he said, smiling at my expression of surprise. "Now that I do know it, I shall do my best to forget it." "To forget it?" "You see," he explained, "I consider that a man's brain originally is like a little empty attic, and you have to stock it with such furniture as you choose. A fool takes in all the lumber of every sort that he comes across, so that the knowledge which might be useful to him gets crowded out, or at best is jumbled up with a lot of other things, so that he has a difficulty in laying his hands upon it. Now the skillful workman is very careful indeed as to what he takes into his brain attic. He will have nothing but the tools which may help him in doing his work, but of these he has a large assortment and all in the most perfect order. It is a mistake to think that that little room has elastic walls and can distend to any extent. Depend upon it, there comes a time when for every addition of knowledge you forget something that you knew before. It is of the highest importance, therefore, not to have useless facts elbowing out the useful ones." "But the solar system," I protested. "What the deuce is it to me?" he interrupted impatiently. "You say that we go round the sun. If we went round the moon, it would not make a pennyworth of difference to me or to my work." I read Sherlock Holmes when I was a lad, and a lot of people are talking about the Sherlock Holmes stories because of Victober, a booktube event which focuses on Victorian literature, and the character of Sherlock Holmes was created during the Victorian era. Now, when I was young, part of that passage made a big impression on me, and I will reread the part that I quoted out into my little notebook. I had it on a piece of paper or a notebook or something, and somehow over the years I managed to keep it intact, and I still have it somewhere in my original boyish handwriting. "I consider that a man's brain originally is like a little empty attic, and you have to stock it with such furniture as you choose. A fool takes in all the lumber of every sort that he comes across, so that the knowledge which might be useful to him gets crowded out, or at best is jumbled up with a lot of other things, so that he has a difficulty in laying his hands upon it. Now the skillful workman is very careful indeed as to what he takes into his brain attic. He will have nothing but the tools which may help him in doing his work, but of these he has a large assortment, and all in the most perfect order. It is a mistake to think that that little room has elastic walls and can distend to any extent. Depend upon it, there comes a time when for every addition of knowledge you forget something that you knew before. It is of the highest importance, therefore, not to have useless facts elbowing out the useful ones. That made such a big impression on me. Of course, I did not want to be a fool. And so I thought that there was wisdom in those lines. The course of many years has revealed to me, of course, that it's balderdash and poppycock, as we might say. It's really a very poor philosophy of education. I think, and I am just guessing here, I think that scientists who study the brain probably would tell you that he is wrong in that assessment of the cramped limitedness of the space in the human brain. What is the quote by Emily Dickinson about the wideness of the brain? I was fortunately fairly early on in my course when I realized that that was stupid. I believe maturing and learning as we get shoved into these systems of knowledge which were created long before we were, I believe that such stepping stones are important. And another one for me was the poet E.E. Cummings with his "Since Feeling is First" ideology. And I adhered to that for a long time. I say a long time, but now from the perspective of 16 years, I realize it was just a brief window, as with this Holmes excerpt or this Conan Doyle excerpt. Part of that may be because I was not a detective, I was a poet, and for the poet, you absolutely don't know where the bit of knowledge that you might need can come from. It is exceedingly stupid to throw roadblocks in the way of potential information, potential ideas. That is a reason why I don't go back and reread Sherlock Holmes since the days of my childhood, though many booktubing adults take significant pleasure out of Conan Doyle yet, and I may, as my reading speed ups, try to revisit Sherlock Holmes and see what I get from it. What you take from things at one stage of your life is very different what you take from what you take at a different stage. Now with Cummings, that whole feelings is first ideology was bad, and it really probably sent me down, what was the word, divagation that I used wrongly in another video. It sent me down a wrong path from which I did not extricate myself probably for a good 5 or more years. And then when you go down the wrong path, of course, you have to walk all the way back. So it's best not to do that. Now, people will point out, yes, you don't want your brain attic filled with shabby philosophy or shabby information. So, if you know something is a bad piece of work, you don't want to really go out of your way to accumulate that in your brain, which of course is not like an attic. But you never know. And I think it has been pointed out that even Sherlock Holmes himself did not adhere to that stupid philosophy. If need be, he would pull out a fact from the ether that probably by any reasonable reason would not be considered to have application to dick work or detective work, I guess. So he did not adhere. It's just an example of a character in a fiction spouting philosophy, spouting something because they have to have something to say. Famously, T.S. Eliot more than once referred to the Shakespeare line as flies to wanton boys, so we are to the gods, which he criticizes for being bad philosophy, and it is. But you have to recognize it's spoken by a character. In Shakespeare, there are other examples of that sort of thing, but also examples of philosophy that are not so easily dismissed. I suppose the lesson there would be that there still may, or there yet may be more value in reading Shakespeare than in reading Conan Doyle. But I don't want to step out onto that limb. Now, that said, in terms of knowledge, in terms of learning things, I am something of an advocate of serendipity, and I want to show you my next little exhibit, a book which I recently acquired. Just send me word by the historian Orlando Figes, I don't know how you say his name, Figes, I would guess. Although you never know how somebody pronounces their name. In the past, I was in a employment where I had to meet with lots of people, and I was sent out to meet with a Mr. Jimenez. And I thought to myself, ha ha ha, how stupid this guy is. He doesn't even know that this man's name is not pronounced Jimenez, it's pronounced Jimenez. Well, I went out to meet this man, and he introduced himself to me and said, hello, I can't remember the first name, I'll say David, I'm David Jimenez. So who was the stupid one? I was the stupid one. When it comes to pronunciation of names, I don't really care. You know, some people make big bones about, like my name, Novak. Oh, no, it should be Novak or something like that over there. I don't care. Call me Novak. I mean, one time I worked a job and a guy always referred to me as Paul, and it didn't bother me. Sorry for the digression, or was that a divagation? I don't know. So I heard about this book on Micah Cummins' channel. If I can think of it, I'll link it in the description box below. Absolutely a book that I have no interest in reading, and yet it was sort of serendipitous that I happened to hear Micah talking about it on his channel. Why? Well, because if you follow my channel, you know that in the recent past, I read Solzhenitsyn's The Gulag Archipelago under a misconception as to the nature of that work, but nevertheless, I did it. And all in all, as with most things, even though such a work really should have no place whatsoever in my wheelhouse, I'm glad that I read it. It was a worthwhile read. And one thing that I've learned over the years is that you should never turn your nose up at serendipity. So the fact that Micah mentioned this, and I had just recently read something about the Gulag. This is a true story of love and survival in the Gulag. A husband and wife exchanged letters, which were smuggled in and out of the Gulag and stayed together throughout the course of the man's duration in the Gulag system. Even whilst Micah was talking about the book, I knew that it was not a book I wanted to read. On the other hand, a lot of people have talked about this historian, and so he seems like an author that is probably worth getting to know, or at least know of. And one good way that you can get to know of something is to get a book by it and not read it. So I bought this book intending not to read it. Now I must add to that, this is a hardback. I would much rather have something like this in a paperback, not necessarily because of any added introduction that might have been put onto it. In this case, I'm sure there was none, but because I don't have the space for this book. A paperback I don't have space for either, but I could jam it in somewhere more easily than this. But then you run into the situation of, I went online and happened to see a copy of this for $4, including shipping. Now, I had no intention of even buying this book until I saw that. And then when I saw that, $4 for this, that I can put on my shelf and know about. If I need to in the future, I can dip into it. Or who knows, I might just be overcome by the uncontrollable urge to pick it open and read it. It's something of a memoir, a genre that I'm not particularly interested in either, but memoirs tend to be fairly easy reading, so I can give it a go if, as I say, the impetus moves me, or my whimsy, as Sir Lord Peter might have said. A book like this, and for the purposes to which I wish to possibly apply it, would not be useful to me sitting in the public library. It might take 6 weeks to get it, if indeed the library has it, which in the case of most books that I want from the public library in Chicago, it does not have, and the interlibrary loan system is very difficult. So, $4 in my hands on a shelf, it's something of a no-brainer. It will, of course, clutter my, by now, not empty attic at all. And if you know anything about my habits here, it's not neatly organized at all. Of course, that would not necessarily have helped in the writing of poetry either. When it comes down to it, as Matt Wall has said, having read something is not going to help you as a writer necessarily. Quite likely, it will throw blocks in your way. You know, and I think again about the word, which I've mentioned in a recent video, antimacassar, which is a word which crops up in Edith Wharton, and it also cropped up in Troubles by J.G. Farrell, which I just read, both delineating, well, in J.G. Farrell's case, a decaying aristocracy, in Wharton's case, a somewhat stagnant, at least spiritually stagnant aristocracy. But an antimacassar is a piece of cloth that goes over a chair, like, imagine like a wing chair, to protect it. And Wharton's books, of course, are loaded with that kind of vocabulary. There's a certain sort of gilded clock which sits on the mantelpiece. And if you go to these old mansions, you see them. Everybody had them in the day. There is a word for that. And reading Wharton at this late age, often on a tablet with a dictionary easily accessible, I would look these things up. Now, as a young person, had I been reading Wharton, that would have been impossible. And if I had done it, it certainly would have filled my little empty attic with all of the wrong information. For the kind of work that I was doing, the fact of, or the existence of, an antimacassar was not something that would have been useful to me at all. It would have sent me off on a road even worse than the 5-year journey that I took after being so thoroughly imbued with the ethos of E.E. Cummings, the poet. I recommend his poetry. I love his poetry. But as T.S. Eliot might point out, he was not the best role model to imitate. E.E. Cummings, to my knowledge, did not talk much about E.E. Cummings, and he was not referring to E.E. Cummings. So if I had accumulated a huge store of vocabulary like antimacassar, it would have ruined me. Oh, Melia, my dear, this does everything crown. Who should have supposed I should meet you in town? And whence such fair garments, such prosperity? Oh, didn't you know I'd been ruined, said she. Well, as a writer, you can be ruined very easily by too much prosperity. So I thought I would show you this book. God knows where I will put it. It looks to be a very interesting story. And if I ever get some, what is it called? The reading where you eliminate the vocalization, some non-subvocalized reading ability, which is not a goal for me, I should point out, then maybe I will undertake this and read it in half an hour. Maybe it would be a good book to try. Now, I thought I will close with another book which I just picked up from the box, another memoir which I have absolutely no interest in reading because of that. However, at some point in time, I think it was during the Trump presidency, we took great solace from watching this man's television shows. And when the book came out, I thought it would be something worth looking at and worth reading, probably because he is a very smart man. And he's an excellent interviewer as well. And surely what he has to say is worth at least taking a peek at. This was in the neighborhood box. Unfortunately, years after that initial spark of interest was ignited, but there it was, pretty well perfect shape. It looks as if it has been read. This has not. This is pristine, except for this little, where they put the sticker. So I will look at it. We shall see. I will leave this video, which has gone on long enough at that point. Thank you very much for stopping by my channel.